Good afternoon, and welcome to Boston College. My name is Melinda Brown Donovan, and I am Associate Director of Continuing Education for the School of Theology and Ministry, or STM as it's known. The School of Theology and Ministry is very grateful today for the support from the Church in the 21st Century Center for their help in publicizing this event. As many of you know, STM was formed in 2008, bringing together both the Boston College Institute of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry and the Weston Jesuit School of Theology. As a school, we offer graduate degrees for lay people studying for ministry, as well as people going on an ordination track. In addition, we have a third branch of the school, which offers non-credit continuing education opportunities, including on-campus events like this one, as well as online courses through C21 Online. Today, the School of Theology and Ministry is very pleased to be hosting this annual Ministry Renewal Day on new evangelization for today's parish. This is an annual tradition that was initiated more than 10 years ago by the Institute of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry, and it has been continued by the STM. And its purpose is to bring together our alums, our friends, their friends, and anyone doing ministry in the New England area. So it's great to see all of you here today. This Ministry Renewal Day is our gift to all of you, you who faithfully serve the church in so many different ways. I invite you to immerse yourselves in the spirit of prayer, the spirit of community, and the spirit of learning that this afternoon will provide. It is our hope that you will come away energized for your ministry in a new way. Now, I am pleased to introduce to you STM's Dean, Mark Massa of the Society of Jesus. He is also Professor of Church History at the STM, and he will introduce our presenters.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be here and to welcome you. We are delighted you came here for this annual event, and we hope you will come back, like voting in South Boston, early and often. I would be remiss at this beginning of our afternoon if I did not acknowledge the person who put this all together. As all of you who work in parish ministry know, making things look effortless takes a lot of effort. So please join me in thanking Melinda herself, Melinda Dunn. And thank you for that little plug about the STM. I appreciate that. We have an embarrassment of riches this afternoon. Our two speakers are past masters of their crafts, and we're honored to host them here. Jane Regan is Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Education, as well as Director of Continuing Education for the School of Theology and Ministry, and she holds a PhD from Catholic University of America. Jane's research and teaching focus primarily on adult faith formation, bringing adult learning theory, adult spiritual development, and the theoretical and pastoral applications of total community catechesis into dynamic conversation. And as you will shortly discover, it's a quite dynamic conversation. In addition to her scholarly work, Jane serves as a consultant on both the local and the national levels to important projects of effective adult faith formation. Recently, Jane received the Distinguished Service Award from the National Conference of Catechetical Leaders, a most deserved recognition of her contribution over many years to Catholic religious education. She is the co-author of 5 books, including Toward an Adult Church, which was published in 2002. David Couturier of the Capuchin Order is a trained psychotherapist and an organizational development specialist who has provided organizational consultation and facilitation to parishes, dioceses, and religious congregations around the world. David holds a licentiate in psychology from the Gregorian University in Rome, a DMin in pastoral counseling and a PhD in pastoral psychology from the Graduate Theological Union. I think that makes him an honorary Jesuit. I have all those doctoral degrees. He is the past president of Franciscans International, an NGO at the United Nations. He served as vicar provincial of the Capuchin Order in New York before joining the faculty of St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore as director of pastoral formation. He also served as the dean of the School of Theology there before his appointment as vice rector. After leaving St. Mary's, he served as director of pastoral planning for our diocese, the Archdiocese of Boston, from 2009 until that past May. Dave is the author of 2 books, The Fraternal Economy, A Pastoral Psychology of Franciscan Economics, and The 4 Conversions, The Spirituality of Transformation. He is also the author of more than 50 articles on the psychology of justice and organizational change. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great honor to introduce Jane and David as your speakers this afternoon.
It is great to be here and great to see so many of you here for this lovely afternoon. We're excited about the topic and excited about examining more closely the new evangelization and its implication for parish life. So let me give you a sense of what this afternoon's going to be. We're going to begin by looking at what's this about a new evangelization? What's new about a new evangelization? Is this just the old evangelization kind of repackaged? Then we'll take a quick break. And then we're going to look at, and David's going to lead us in looking at the question of what's changing in parishes and how a new evangelization can help address that. That'll be the second half. And then we'll have some time for full group conversation. So that's the afternoon for us. So we want to begin by asking the question, why a new evangelization? Or why a new evangelization? To look at that, we want to look at 3 basic elements. We want to begin then by situating the conversation about a new evangelization within the general understanding of evangelization as come down for us from the time of Vatican Council II. How have we understood evangelization? And then in light of that, what do we think about this new evangelization? Secondly, we want to talk about the socio-cultural dynamics that requires this renewed perspective on evangelization. That's what's leading us to this new evangelization is some significant sociocultural changes. And then finally, we'll begin to articulate the implications for how we think about parish life, a theme that David will pick up with more emphasis during the second half today. So we want to look first of all at evangelization in context. And the first is in context of your own experience. We have all been both recipients and proclaimers of evangelization. We've all been both evangelized and evangelizers. So let me begin by inviting you to call to mind a time when what another person said or did enhanced or strengthened or deepened your faith. Call to mind a time that a gesture or a word from someone else deepened your faith, enhanced your faith. And then reflect on the question, would you consider that an evangelizing moment? Why or why not? Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to get the kind of that image in your head, that story in your head, and then I'm going to invite you to just get into groups of 2 or 3 at your tables, just to introduce yourselves if you haven't already, and just talk about the person or the event that had that evangelizing effect. You'll have time to chat again later. And I want to invite you to kind of hold on to that memory and hold on to that thought and the ideas shared by others. Because as we begin to take apart what we mean by evangelization, I think you'll see echoes of that. Echoes of your own stories and your own experience in what we talk about. But in addition to looking at evangelization in the context of our own experience, we also want to look at evangelization in the context of church documents. As you probably know, college professors only have about 3 things they say. We just say it all differently in different settings. Okay, we make it sound different. Okay, really, I don't think I have much more than that. And one of the three things that I say, in fact, you're going to get a couple of them today. Okay? One of the three things I say are, church documents are our friends. I honestly believe that church documents, many of them, there's some extraordinary exceptions to this rule, but for the vast majority of them, church documents are the clearest indication of the work of the Spirit in the life of the church. Because church documents, think of Vatican Council II and the documents that came from that council. Church documents are always ahead, are always calling us to a future that's inviting and enticing and challenging. So that if we needed to, and those doors were to spring shut, and they would bring the coffee in here, I could regale you for hours on the way in which evangelization is understood in each of these documents. So each of these documents gives us a new lens or a new aspect to look at when we look at the very notion of evangelization. And we could trace through the way in which the notion of evangelization shifted slightly across each of those. But we're not going to do that, just because, in fact, we have other places to go, people to see sometime today. But in addition to the list that's there, we have a new document that just brand new published, Message to the People of God, which came out from the Synod on Evangelization and Catechesis, which just completed in Rome late last week. So that's yet another document for us to be mindful of as we talk about evangelization. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going through each of these documents in detail, what I'm going to do is to take them apart some and pull together some themes about what evangelization is about. Again, remember, we want to argue that our understanding of a new evangelization is rooted in our understanding of evangelization in general. Okay, and then we're going to say, what's new about it? So the first is evangelization in general. When we talk about evangelization, I want to talk about 4 dimensions or 4 elements that we want to keep in mind. First of all, evangelization is connected to the very life and identity of the church. Evangelii Nuntiandi, or the Apostolic Exhortation on Evangelization, says, and this is quoted in many documents, the church exists in order to evangelize. That everything else is in service to that. Everything else is in service to the evangelizing work of the church. That fundamental work of proclaiming God's message in the world. That's at the heart of the identity of the church. Secondly, we want to say that the responsibility of the church and of all its members is to evangelize. If we thought about evangelization in the past, we would think about it as something that missionaries did to faraway places. And in fact, that is one form of evangelization, but it's only one form. What we recognize now is that evangelization is the responsibility of the whole church and of each of the members within the church, are all part of the process of evangelization. So the work of evangelization, this is out of Ad Gentis, a document from Vatican II. The work of evangelization is the basic duty of the people of God. That's the work of the lay people in the life of the world, is to evangelize. Thirdly, evangelization is multifaceted and complex. Out of the document Catechesi Tradendae, all these documents are listed on the prior page. Evangelization is a rich, complex, and dynamic reality made up of elements, or one could say moments, that are essential and different from each other and that must be kept in view simultaneously. We're going to look at what those elements are in a minute. So evangelization isn't something that's done, kind of check off our to-do list. It's rather at the very heart of the nature of the church. It's the work of all of us, and it's a complex, multi-layered, expressed in a variety of ways kind of work. And finally, the 4th element of evangelization is that it's rooted in the situation of those being evangelized. And what we're going to see is that's the important point for the new evangelization. That fourth element is what is distinctive about the new evangelization. That it requires us, charges us, calls us to look at the situation, the socio-cultural, political, economic, historical situation in which people find themselves. And that we have a responsibility to look at that in order to figure out how best to proclaim the word. Evangelization then, and this is out of Evangelii Nuntiandi, this is what I think is about the best definition of evangelization. Evangelization is bringing the good news into all strata of humanity, and through its influence, through the influence of the good news, transforming humanity from within and making it new. And what do I like about that? First of all, it's about bringing that into all elements of human life. This isn't a church-y thing, churchy isn't only in church, but rather it permeates all elements of what it means to be a human being. And then we believe that that word, that good news, is transformative. And that when proclaimed, whether we proclaim that in word or in action, when proclaimed, it is transformative of humanity from within. And it's a transformation that happens not just within the human being, but in the social order as well. The General Directory for Catechesis says, evangelization is a dynamic reality which contains within it interdependent activities which are to be kept in creative tension. Witness and proclamation, word and sacrament, interior change and social transformation. So that evangelization is neither simply living the Christian life, nor is it simply proclaiming in words the gospel message. It's both. To simply live the Christian life without giving a reason for your hope is to do a less than effective job in proclaiming that message. We need to live lives that people say, I want what they have. Right? That's the witness that's there. But they also need to hear what that is. I was thinking of that when we had our opening prayer, that reading is such a powerful invitation to hope that people need to hear. That needs to be proclaimed. So it's both word and sacrament. And importantly, it's both interior change and social transformation. So it's not only the internal personal change of the believer, although that's essential, it also involves transforming social structures. It also involves the transformation of cultural realities in order to allow people to more freely and more effectively live out the gospel, to live out the Word of God. So it seems to me that those definitions of evangelization, those descriptions of evangelization, give us a good place to start when we look at what we mean by the new evangelization. That's what I want to look at now. The new evangelization is connected to the very life and identity of the church, the responsibility of the church and all its members, multifaceted and complex, and rooted in the situation of those being evangelized. So in many ways, the new evangelization isn't new, it's renewed. It isn't new, it's just reshaped in light of contemporary culture. It's saying, not only do we evangelize to those who have never heard the gospel message, we evangelize to ourselves, to those within the Christian community, and to those who have been baptized but have not been fully catechized. Let me talk about that. 3 situations in which evangelization is needed, in which evangelization is called for. The first one is those who never heard the gospel. First, there is a situation which the church's missionary activity addresses. Peoples, groups, and sociocultural contexts in which Christ and his gospel are not known, or which lack Christian communities sufficiently mature to be able to incarnate the faith in their own environment and proclaim it to other groups. This is the mission ad gentis, kind of in the proper sense of the term. When we understood missionary in the past, that's primarily what we meant. And even evangelization is primarily what we meant. The second group are those who are in life-giving Christian communities where the whole pastoral activity of the church is evangelizing. So when you look at the church parish community, you can't say, well, that's evangelizing and that's not. No, a parish community lived out in its fullest, giving expression to who it is evangelizing. That process is evangelizing. So this is described as there are the second kind of setting in which evangelization takes place are the Christian communities with adequate and solid ecclesial structures. They are fervent in their faith and in Christian living. They bear witness to the gospel in their surroundings and have a sense of commitment to the universal mission. In these communities, the church carries out her activity in pastoral care. So evangelization includes all the ways in which the parish community, which the church lives out its identity. But it's the third group that's of interest to us today as we talk about the new evangelization. Those who are baptized but live in a context where faith is held exteriorly. And I went ahead and put this on. I'm just going to read it to you. In many countries of established Christian tradition, and sometimes in younger churches, there exists an intermediate situation between those who've never heard the gospel and those who live in firm Christian, effective Christian communities. There's an intermediate situation where entire groups of the baptized have lost a living sense of the faith, or even no longer consider themselves members of the church, and live a life far removed from Christ and his gospel. Such situations require a new evangelization. The peculiar nature of this situation is found in the fact that missionary activity, evangelization, is directed towards the baptized of all ages who live in religious contexts in which Christian points of reference are perceived purely exteriorly. Here, the primary proclamation and basic catechesis are priorities. Now, this probably never happens in your parish community, but I know parishes where parents have their infants baptized kind of like they have them get their 6-month shots, because it's the next thing to do, Or parents perhaps bring their children for first sacraments and don't go to the celebration of Eucharist themselves. As I said, that probably doesn't happen in your place, but I know it happens some places. So the way in which people live out or live into the Christian faith and those contexts in which it's held purely exteriorly, and those two examples are examples of people for whom the church has meaning. There's many and many more where participation in the church is no longer part of their weekly life, for whom Sunday liturgy is optional and has been replaced by going to the gym or going to Starbucks or sleeping in, okay, as points of meaning. We're going to look at that in a minute. So there's a whole, where the Christian point of reference are perceived purely exteriorly. Right? That's what the new evangelization is about. That's what the new evangelization is looking to address. Those contexts in which people who are basically people who are baptized, well, not exclusively, but primarily people who are baptized, and yet find that their world of meaning is not shaped by the Christian tradition, is not shaped by membership in the church. So, remember now, where are we? Okay, we're saying here's what evangelization is, and here's what a new evangelization is. It's focusing particularly on this point of view, on this particular group. Now, remember what I said earlier, that the point of the new evangelization, or the dimension that makes the new evangelization new, is its attention to the socio-cultural context within which we're living. And that's what I want to look at right now. We want to say that evangelization is rooted in the situation of those being evangelized. Now, if this were a 16-week course, we could now spend all kinds of time talking about the dynamics of culture today, okay? We could talk about media. We could talk about pluralism. We could talk about consumerism. We could talk about all kinds of elements that shape how we see the world today. I'm going to pick up three, okay, to highlight. Three dimensions of what's going on in kind of a socio-cultural context that I believe has significant influence on what the new evangelization looks like and what it's calling us to do in living out and living towards this new evangelization. The first is the recognition or acknowledgement of the constructed nature of reality. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so I'll explain what it means. The fact of the matter is, the way in which I see reality, the way in which I perceive what freedom means, what man, woman, God means, the way in which I perceive reality is defined by my perspective. I'm a little over 50-something. Woman, Catholic lay woman, living in the United States in a fairly, probably lower middle class life, and that has an impact on how I see reality, how I make sense of reality around me. Does that make sense? Okay. So I understand core values and my day-to-day experience. I perceive it in terms of where I am and where I'm situated. So again, words like diversity and freedom and individuality are all rooted in where I am. Here's a quick example. When I grew up, quite some time ago, when I grew up in the town that I grew up in central Connecticut, the other were the Polish Catholics, right? We went to St. Thomas, which was Irish Catholic, and the Polish Catholics went to St. Stanislaus, okay? So that was the difference, that was the other. Where my children grew up and where your children have grown up, the other is a rich diversity of people. The apartment complex where I live right now is a little UN, you know? We have people from all kinds of traditions. In fact, I was commenting to someone the other day that in the little corner of the apartment complex where I live, there were no trick-or-treaters. And then it dawned on me there were very few people who were, for whom the United States culture would be their primary culture. There are people from India, people from Muslim countries, that just for whom trick-or-treating was not part of how they were raised or what their own tradition was. So when my daughters hear the word diversity, and when I hear the word diversity, we think of two different things. Our perspective has an impact on how we see reality. Two corollaries to that. One is that it means recognizing the different situations of the other and being cognizant that they see reality differently. And it's secondly, the second kind of corollary to this, is that if I'm only seeing reality from this perspective, I have no place else I can see it from, then it's always partial, right? So there's an acknowledgement if you're only seeing reality from a particular perspective, you always have only a partial view. So that we have, in that sense, our version of truth, our version of what it means to proclaim the truth is situated. Now that doesn't mean God is situated or God is partial, but rather our view is partial. Our view is always only a point of view. Now the strength of the large community to which we belong, large Catholic community, is we have a lot of different views looking at the same reality. One of the interesting things about following this synod on the new evangelization, following the comments that were made by the various language groups as well as by some of the participants in it, was to see the different emphases on evangelization that came from different parts of the world. Again, recognizing that this new evangelization is viewed differently from different perspectives and different ways of viewing reality. What does this mean for a new evangelization? It means recognizing our own givens about what it means to be a person of faith, what it means to be a believer, is always only partial, and that others have very different views of that. The image that we had back in the 50s and 60s is that there was a good Catholic. Now, whether that was true or not would be an interesting conversation, okay, which we're not going to do. But I would dare say that if we were to say what's a good Catholic, even in this group of primarily good Catholics, I would assume, we would get a variety of descriptions of what it means to be a good Catholic. So different perspectives, different situations, has us see reality differently. Secondly, it means that this new evangelization requires that we be attentive to the experience of those around us. That we need to take time to listen to their stories. Here's a quick story. This was in a parish not near here, a parish that I was in Minnesota. When my oldest daughter got ready for First Communion, I had to go to the parish, the parent preparation sessions. Now, mind you, I'd been doing these since about 1976, when I had finished my master's degree in religious education. This is the first time I was the recipient of these presentations. Now, in this parish, which I was new to, I had just moved there, so I was brand new into the parish. In this parish, they had 8 sessions, okay, so once a month throughout the year. Use the Brusselman program. Some of you may remember that. 8 sessions, met at 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning. 8 of them. 8:30 in the morning. Okay. You getting the picture so far? Well, when I went to the first one, I was kind of heartened because, first of all, there was coffee, which covered a multitude of problems. But we were also going to be sitting around at tables. And we were going to be sitting at tables assigned based on who our child's catechist was. So I'm thinking, this is going to be great. I'm going to have an opportunity to meet parents whose children are in the same catechetical sessions that my daughter is in. I was really new to the parish. This is like my second year in the parish. I didn't hardly know anybody, so this is going to be a great opportunity to meet people. There were name tags on the table. I'm thinking, oh, great. I made everybody at the table put on name tags. I'm thinking, this is going to be great. Did I mention there were 8 of them? Okay, 8 of them. 8:30 in the morning. Okay, Sunday morning. Okay. We never got to talk to one another. 8 sessions for an hour each at 8:30 in the morning, and we never spoke to one another. We were lectured to the whole time. Now, I'm of the school of thought that says, if you're not willing to be part of the solution, you can't complain about the problem. Which I'm sure many of you in pastoral leadership would love more people to have that point of view, I realize. And so I didn't say anything, but clearly somebody did. Because when the pastor gathered us together, now as you can imagine, it was a remnant community by the time about month 6, On top of that, I'm a single parent, and so all the other parents were doing tag team religious ed, where all the husbands came one month and all the wives came the other month. So one month I'd be sitting at a table of all men and me, and the next month it'd be all the women. It was great. It was an interesting experience. So when the pastor gathered this remnant community who was there for the whole thing, and said, it would have been nice if you'd had a chance to talk to one another. You think? Okay. And hopefully at some point you can. Like where? Stop and shop? I mean, where do we have the opportunity to talk to one another? But, he said, we had so much to tell you. It's not that complicated. Really, Eucharist is not that complicated. That we needed 8 sessions at 8:30 in the morning for an hour and never got to talk to one another. Our experience of our own engagement with God was dismissed in service to what they had to tell us. Okay? That's a problem. When we're talking about the situatedness of our knowing, we're talking about the importance of recognizing that perspective we take has an impact on how we see reality, then hearing other points of view is essential. And being able to engage in those conversations is essential. So that taking seriously the present reality of lived adult faith and providing the opportunity to reflect on that is essential to the new evangelization. I, for one, think that those of us involved in adult formation and working with adults, the only thing we really need to do is to provide a structure and opportunity for conversation. I think that that's really at the heart of what we're doing, and I believe that's at the heart of a new evangelization. So that's the first characteristic of this context in which this new evangelization takes place. This is the constructed nature of reality. If you like that one, you're going to love the second one. A suspicion of the adequacy of meta-narratives. Okay. I can make this clear. You'll see. What do I mean by meta-narrative? By meta-narratives, I mean those overarching stories, those master stories that explain and maintain a synthesized view of the world. What makes our world make meaning? What gives meaning to our world? For example, the American dream, rugged individualism, the Paschal Mystery, the Promised Land. All of those are meta-narratives. They're narratives that give meaning to the world around us. They help us kind of pull things together to explain how things work. To give us a sense of shared identity, something that we all can believe in. Now, the problem is, if we take that first perspective, that first observation, that our reality is constructed by where we are, by where we stand, then we can talk about some of the problems of the meta-narrative. First of all, it puts forth overarching stories that ignore or even suppress alternative understandings or dissenting stories. Let me give an example. The American dream, owning your own home. Now, that American dream really energized a generation ago, effectively, in settling down, in building up the country, etc. But that same American dream was a significant contributing factor to the present economic situation. The illusion that in order to be a good American, you need to own your own home, put people in a situation where they thought they had to own, and put banks in a situation where they thought they ought to help them. So that sense of the American dream, in fact, ends up covering over the fact that a house isn't what everybody needs. Do you see how that happens? Okay. Or another one, the notion that we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. You know, if you work hard, then you're going to get ahead. That's right. That's kind of a meta-narrative. Okay, you see how meta-narrative is. Okay, it's a meta-narrative. Well, what does that mean? That means if we see someone who isn't doing well, who's poor and in need, well, clearly they didn't work very hard. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in need. Because we know that if you work hard, you get ahead. Well, clearly they didn't. Do you see how that covers over, that meta-narrative kind of covers over the individual stories, the individual experience? So that the meta-narrative then puts an emphasis on the big story while setting aside the individual stories. Meta-narratives give stories of the collective to the loss of the individual experience. And it serves to sustain or maintain the status quo and the influence of large institutions. So that same suspicion that we have towards meta-narrative, the contemporary culture has towards large institutions for the same reason. It tends to minimize personal experience, personal story, in service to the larger. In the end, people in contemporary culture will say, it's not the meta-narrative that will explain who we are and who we're called to be. It's the individual struggle to make meaning of their lives that has it make sense. Now, let me make clear, we're not saying we shouldn't have any meta-narratives. Of course we have meta-narratives, we have to. And we have the meta-narrative of the Paschal Mystery. Now, there's a meta-narrative that we want to continue. Now, in fact, there's a shadow to that one, in the context in which the talk of suffering leading to new life, which is at the heart of the Paschal Mystery, that has been used in some settings to say, it's okay if you're suffering. You should put up with the suffering, because that will lead you to new life. No. No, we have a responsibility to overcome all suffering that we can. The remainder, yes, the remainder is redemptive. But to say to someone who's in an oppressed situation, well, it's okay, this is going to lead you to new life, is to miss the real meaning of the message. So what does this have to do with a new evangelization? It seems to me one of the things it means is we need to begin with individual stories and only then move into the meta-narrative. Let me give you a quick example. In a parish that I'd worked in, I was a director of religious education of the RCIA. Most of you are familiar with RCIA, yeah. In this group they would be. And I remember quite clearly one year, remember those when you're initiating people through baptism, then you use the A-cycle readings. Okay, so we used A-cycle readings for several years in a row because we had people being baptized, and so we used A-cycle. And so I remember one Sunday in Lent, we're standing around the coffee pot having coffee, and it's myself as director and a catechist who I worked with for several years, and all of the participants. And one of the participants says, see, look, there it is, that message that's been there all along. God calls us to act for justice. Yep, it's there. Yeah, it's there. And we talked about it. Okay? Same Sunday the following year. Same catechist, same director, different people, same coffee pot, different coffee, but same coffee pot. Okay. Cleaned, but same coffee pot. Yep, somebody said basically. There it is again, that theme we've been talking about. God loves us no matter what. Yep, it's there. Why the difference? Because their stories were different. Now, my role as catechist is to say, you are right. God loves us no matter what, and because of that, we act for justice. And the year before, I made clear, you are right. We act for justice because we know that God loves us no matter what. So it's not like we don't present the whole message, but we begin the message and focus the message in a way that's reflective of the individual stories. So we do have a meta-narrative that we hold on to. We do have one that gives meaning to our lives. It's the whole Christian story. It's the good news. It's the gospel. But what makes that a meaningful meta-narrative is how we live our lives. And that's the link we need to be sure to make. All right, so we've talked about the sense that reality is constructed. We talked about the sense that we're suspicious of large institutions. And the third point I want to make is the reality of pluralism, and particularly of religiously pluralistic context. Diana Eck from, she was at Harvard, I think she still is, in her book, A New Religious America, How a Christian Country Has Now Become the World's Most Religiously Diverse Nation, makes a really strong claim for the case that the United States has become the nation with the greatest numbers of religions present within its borders. Some would argue England, in fact, is more, but the United States is fairly high up there. What I want to pick up on is some interesting statistics, particularly regarding the unaffiliated. This is taken from the Pew Research, which I've cited there, called Nuns on the Rise, N-O-N-E-S, Nuns on the Rise. I know, confusing. A couple things worth pointing out from the research done here by the Pew Foundation. First of all, that in 2012, 73% of people in the United States are Christian, name themselves as Christian. That's down by 5% in the past 5 years. What that means is that a quarter of the people in the United States make meaning of the world around them with something besides a Christian perspective. Okay, that's significant. What's also significant is that 19.6 are unaffiliated. That's up from 15.3, so that's up 4.3%. A not insignificant increase over 5 years. So almost 1 in 5 have no religious tradition. And when we look to the group that's 18 to 29, it's 32% are unaffiliated. Okay? So it's 1 in 3 of the 18 to 29-year-olds who are unaffiliated. Donald Kinman, in his book, You Lost Me, talks about 3 reasons, or 3, not reasons so much as 3 types of unaffiliated. One are the prodigals. Those are the ones that at some level disavow their faith, understand themselves to be ex-Christians. The second are what he refers to as the nomads. These are people who just kind of wandered away. They often still think of themselves as Christians, if they think about it at all. They're the group that say to you, I was raised Catholic, but I don't practice it now. That's the nomads. And the third group are the exiles, which Donald Kinsman argues was one of the growing groups. That they still see themselves as invested in being Christian, but feel caught between the church and culture. They feel that the church is not responding to contemporary cultural realities. Okay, what does all this data mean for us when we talk about evangelization? The first is, if we look at this image, recognize that people have many more choices. I was trying to fit on the overhead, on the slide, all the various religions that are named as being present in the United States, but it would have been about 9 slides in order to get them all on there at a readable rate. So there's more choices. Secondly, there's simply more exposure to other traditions. Thirdly, and I think this is the particularly important one for us, there's a growing number of people who make meaning of the world around them outside of or without reference to a religious frame of reference. Okay? More and more people for whom a religious frame of reference is simply not part of how they make meaning of the world around them. Remember that our faith tradition is more than simply what we do on a weekend. That it's through our faith tradition that we make meaning of the world around us, that it forms our identity, our sense of who we are in the world. But for a good number of them, about 19%, 32% of the young adults, They don't use the faith tradition as a frame of reference. In the survey that the Pew Foundation did, it turned out that of that 19.6%, 89% of that group say that they're not looking for a religious faith. They're not even seekers. Okay? It's simply not part of how they see reality. So, what does all this mean for how we think about engaging in the new evangelization? Here we want to talk not so much about what approaches can be used at a parish level. We'll get into that later. I want to talk about some overarching characteristics of the evangelizing believer. And there are 3 of them. The first one is evangelizing in contemporary culture means the importance of authentic lived faith. This is a quote I just want to read to you. This is a quote from the Message to the People of God that just came out from the Synod. We, however, should never think that the new evangelization does not concern us personally. In these days, voices among the bishops were raised to recall that the church must first of all heed the word before she could evangelize the world. The invitation to evangelize becomes, first of all, a call to conversion. We firmly believe that we must convert ourselves above all to the power of Christ, who alone can make all things new, above all our poor existence. So the first thing about new evangelization is we've got to start living it. We've got to have our parishes living out this new evangelization, living out what it means to be believers. So it is the witness of the Christian life, an authentic lived faith, that is the most important evangelizing element that we have. Recognizing the situated nature of our knowing the world around us, the importance of people experiencing that lived faith, that seeing that lived faith. We have that great image from Matthew 11 where some of John's disciples come and ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" And Jesus said to them in reply, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind regain their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead rise, and the poor have the good news proclaimed to them." So it's what Jesus did that was the witness that fostered the believers. And it's what we do also. So that's the first kind of core idea, that authentic lived faith is at the heart of what we need. And we need to figure out how to have that happen. Secondly, I think it's essential that our adult community is articulate about the tradition. Living in a pluralistic context that we live in, we have every responsibility to be able to say something intelligent about the nature of what we believe. Now here, I'm not talking about being able to give a 10-minute précis on the meaning of transubstantiation. But I would like to know what Eucharist means to you. What's the sense of Eucharist in your life? And in order to be able to do that, adults need to be in conversation with other adults. The only way adults are going to learn how to articulate their faith is if they have the opportunity to articulate their faith among themselves. That's the second big thing I say. Look at that, you're getting 2 out of 3 of my big things I say. Documents are our friends is the first thing. The second is, adults grow in their faith best in conversation with other adults about things that matter. One time, a quick story. One time we're in the car, and my oldest daughter, who's now 23, and we'd be mortified if you heard this, that I was telling this story. When she was about 8, we were driving down the road, and a funeral procession passed in front of us. And she said, "So, Mom, what do they do with the heads?" One of the things I learned teaching undergrads is if you ask them to repeat the question, or repeat the question back to them, that sometimes helps. So I said to her, what did they do with the heads? I said, and she said, yes, you're always telling me that they're only burying the body. So what do they do with the heads? Now, that makes us laugh, and it made me laugh. But what it also introduced was an opportunity for me to talk about what I believe about the resurrection, about heaven, about what it means to be a believer, and how we understand death. Now, the fact of the matter is, the only reason I could do that is I had the opportunity to do it in other contexts. If that was the first time I'd ever been asked to talk about death, I don't know what I would have said. That would have been really tough. But because I'd been in contexts where I'd been able to talk about what I believed, it then became easier to talk about it in that context. So the way in which we engage in adult formation is an essential component for a new evangelization. This is a quote from Adult Catechesis in the Christian Community. I weave it into almost every talk that I give, so some of you may have it memorized by now. In summary, in order for the good news of the kingdom to penetrate all the various layers of the human family, that's evangelization, right? We already saw that, okay? It is crucial that every Christian play an active part in the coming of the kingdom. All of this naturally requires adults to play a primary role. Hence, it is not only legitimate but necessary to acknowledge that a fully Christian community can only exist when a systematic catechesis of all its members takes place, and when an effective and well-developed catechesis of adults is regarded as a central task in the catechetical enterprise. Key to new evangelization is adult engagement and adult formation. There's really no other way to do it, is without getting the adult community involved. So, authentic lived faith, articulate about tradition, and then thirdly, we get called to be hospitable towards the other. Now, hospitality has kind of been reduced to being polite and having coffee and donuts and that kind of thing. What we're talking about here is a more radical hospitality. A hospitality that involves welcoming the other, really hearing their faith journey, welcoming them and welcoming their perspective. It's one thing to be hospitable to people, but how hospitable are we to their ideas, particularly ideas with which we don't agree? How do we treat those ideas? So it seems to me, I'm going to close with this, it seems to me that the new evangelization then calls for that authentic lived faith, a capacity to articulate the tradition, and a hospitality towards others. I believe many of these ideas are ideas that David will be picking up in various ways in his presentation in a minute. Before we break, I'm doing kind of a paid political, no, not political, no. I just want to point out a few things in your folders that you have there. The first one is the Touchstones for Preaching. It's a little bookmark. That's a free resource. It's on the web with videos on the basics of preaching, as well as preaching for children, for justice, for weddings and funerals. Many of you may preach at communion services, for example. Many of you may preach in parishes in various settings. Something to look at. Second thing to look at is that there's two offerings, two courses that we're offering in the spring, or during Advent rather. Jesus Foretold and Fulfilled, which is a great reflection on the readings for the Advent season. And the second one is Places and Times for Sharing Faith, which is a reflection on the C21 resource that's on the back table. So it's a reflection on how we share our faith with others. Third point is we will continue this rich conversation about new evangelization with a day-long conference that's going to be held April 20th. There's a folder in the flyer on that. Please save the date. Registration will begin right after the first of the year. So you want to keep an eye on that. Something else, this is back on the back table. If you already have a master's, and if you're looking for something more, consider our postmaster's certificate in spiritual formation. It's offered during the Summer Institute. It's 2 weeks for 3 summers in a row. It's a great opportunity, very intensive, very formative experience. I know some of you have participated in that. It's a great opportunity.